Blog Talk Radio. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Medlock Post radio show. This is where we educate, entertain, enlighten, and empower. The views and opinions on the Medlock Post radio show are those of the host and guests. They are not necessarily the views and opinions of Blog Talk Radio, Spreaker.com, its corporations, affiliates, or any other podcast streaming services. Thank you for joining the show today, and here is your host, Richard G. Medlock.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I am Richard G. Medlock, back again today, which is September 15th, 2022. Welcome to the Medlock Post, and yes, we educate, entertain, enlighten, and empower. And we're going to do some more of that today because so many things are taking place. It's just, we could spend 3 hours a day on a show right now. But that's a lot. And we're looking at circumstances that are just swirling right now. And we're going to get into some of that to bring you up to date on what's happening. But also, I have reached back into the Medlock Post episode 24 when I talked about the central banks and freedom. And I'm going to pull some of that information into today to put everything into perspective about what's going on in the American economy right now. I just looked over, and the market is up 130 points, the Dow Jones Industrial. The market still doesn't know what to do. It's like, which way did it go? Or the dog that caught the car, what do I do now? So we're going to put some of these things out there for you. Apparently, the railroads and the unions have reached a tentative deal. Some unions have already ratified it by vote. However, Pete Buttigieg was nowhere to be found. The Secretary of Transportation was nowhere to be found in any of this. So nobody knows where he is. Does he know where he is? We don't know. So the unions were wanting higher wages, better working conditions. Well, my dad worked for the railroad for 37 years. He hated strikes. He would never go down and stand in the picket line. Never. He hated strikes. He really didn't like the union very much. He felt that their usefulness was over with in the 40s because the federal government came out with a lot of labor laws that protected the employer the way the unions were. But they were still there. He had to pay the dues and all of that garbage that goes with it. But he would never go stand in the picket line. He refused. Now, his fellow workers respected that. Matter of fact, I think there were a couple of others that wouldn't go stand in line. So, but anyway, higher wages and better working conditions. Well, I can tell you by growing up with the railroad, I'm not sure what they can do to better the conditions. You're out there in the weather, moving cars, train cars. I'm just not sure what they're looking at. So higher wages means that the railroads will now be charging more to transport goods, which will transfer into inflation and to the cost to the consumer. You see how that works? See what's going on here? Now, I'm not opposed. Understand, I'm not opposed to railroad workers getting more money. And they're saying, look at the economy. You know, our incomes are depleting because of inflation, so give us more money. Well, that's a cycle there, folks. Now, Joe Biden, the man with his head in the clouds, has out this morning a Fox News poll. 65% of Americans disapprove of Joe Biden handling the economy. Well, I'm surprised it's as low as 65%. 75% say the country is headed in the wrong direction. And they are absolutely correct. 2019, prior to the pandemic and the lockdown, what was that number? What was the number of Americans saying the country was headed in the wrong direction? Folks, I looked it up. It was 22%. Now we're at 75%. 3 times as more people in America think the country, the United States of America, is headed in the wrong direction. Now, here's my message to that 65% and that 75%. Get up and do something about it. Yes, don't just sit there and complain. Get up and do something about it. Let your mayor know, your city and county council know. Let your governor know. Let your state, Senate, and congressional representatives know you're unhappy with what they're doing. Let your federal congressmen and senators know you don't like what's happening. And they need to get back on the right track. They need to get back to constitutional rule of law and do it by the way of the Constitution. I asked that question in our conversation Monday with Chris and Rick from Convention of States organization. And I said, if Washington, D.C. had followed the Constitution in what they did, passing bills or handling money or anything like that, the country would be in a better place. And they agreed. The Constitution is not outdated, folks. And that reminds me, we have Saturday is Constitutional Day, the anniversary of the Constitution being signed in 1787. Now, it was ratified by the states, and in 1788 became the Constitution, but it was signed on September 17th, 1787, and I'm going to play a soundbite from me, previous show, here in a little bit. So, folks, don't just sit around and complain. Do something about it. Go to these corporations and say you're not happy with what you're doing. Let these CEOs know we're not happy with you going woke. Let them know, folks. These corporations will listen, especially if you stop spending money there. They'll turn things around. You know, look at Disney. They've gone 100% woke. Well, I'm going to say 98%. They're still putting out a couple of good things. They've gone woke. And it's hurting them. And when are they going to wake up and realize, uh-oh, we went down the wrong road? But by that time, it might be too late or a long road back to getting all their fans back. It's kind of interesting. I saw on Paramount yesterday, which is CBS, and I subscribe to that. We don't have cable or satellite. We got rid of all that. It's too expensive. And on Amazon, I can subscribe to certain things, which I have. And Paramount is one of them. So I got an email yesterday saying they own Showtime. I didn't know that, but they own Showtime. And they're always asking you to subscribe to it, pay a monthly fee and subscribe to Showtime. Well, I guess Showtime has been losing subscribers. Well, if you look at what's on their list to look at, I can understand why. So yesterday, Paramount pulled Showtime into their Paramount streaming system. It's on there, no extra cost. I went on there last night to check it out. I said, let me see what's going on here. And there was Showtime. All their shows, all this stuff. Didn't find a thing I wanted to watch. It's on there. Now, Paramount will probably raise the price of that monthly subscription. But still, I'm paying less than half of what I was for satellite and have more stuff to watch. Far more stuff. Okay. Plus, we got Hulu Plus Live, and you can watch all these live things, all your local TVs. And it's great and friendly TV. FRNDLY. It's $6.99 a month, and no, they're not paying me to do this. And that's great. It's got great stuff. Got Hallmark and all these old TV shows on there and a lot of good things on there. Check it out, folks. And if you don't have a Amazon Prime subscription, you can go on Amazon Video, and it's like $12.95 a month. So I'm just saying, folks, helping you with your inflation. All right. So 75% say country headed in wrong direction. 65% disapprove of Biden handling economy. But he's out celebrating, hey, this is great. We've done it. Our policies are working. Yeah, for you, but not for us. All right, I was sent this morning. I get these from a good friend, Larry Biddle, who's been on the show. Great educator, developed a great education system that works. It's been going on since 1984. We're going to get him back on here pretty soon and talk some more about education and other things. But this is Delancey'sPlace.com. He sends these to me every day or whenever they come out. And there's some good stuff on there. And I've been meaning to bring them on the program, but today hit perfectly for what is going on. This is Delancey Place, one word, DELANCY place.com. You can sign up for their email newsletter. And this is from An Illustrated Business History of the United States by Richard Vague, V-A-G-U-E. Could be vague. And it's interesting. He kind of gives a history of the controversial creation of the Federal Reserve. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you've never looked at that, it was a very controversial beginning. So let me go through this and then tie into some things that will help you understand what the Federal Reserve is doing right now, what the banks are doing right now, what the federal government is doing, and why none of it is good for you and I. Okay? Going to the article. The lack of a central bank in the United States had long been a contentious and controversial subject, reaching back to legislative debates a century earlier around the authorization of the first and second banks. Now, the first and second banks were in George Washington, Thomas Jefferson's time, and then later on, Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln. Opponents worried about a central bank's potential misuse of power. Get that? Supporters included much of the banking establishment, felt that European countries had experienced greater financial stability than the United States because they had central banks, though not everyone concurred with this view. Now, that's talking about what went on in Europe. We're going to get into that in just a little bit. The powerful banker Paul Warburg of Kuhn, Loeb and Company supported a central bank, and his experience on both sides of the Atlantic positioned him well to influence the debate. He and others argued that a central bank could play the role that J.P. Morgan had reluctantly played in the crises of the 1890s and 1907, that of reassuring markets and arranging liquidity for banks subject to runs. Remember, there used to be runs on the bank. Watch out. They might not be over. All right, Warburg's partner, Jacob Schiff, and I wonder if Adam Schiff is a descendant of him. Might be interesting to look that up. But Warburg's partner, Jacob Schiff, had admonished the New York Chamber of Commerce in 1907, saying that unless we have a central bank with adequate control of credit resources, this country is going to undergo the most severe and far-reaching money panic in its history. A few weeks after the panic, the New York Times published a piece from Warburg called A Plan for a Modified Central Bank, which outlined procedures that he thought could avert panics. The panic of 1907 hit in October of that year. Afterward, Congress prepared for the next one by passing the Aldrich-Vreeland Act of 1908, which allowed national banks to work in concert with the U.S. Treasury to issue emergency currency. This act went further to establish the National Monetary Commission to study banking law and search for a long-term solution to financial problems in the United States. The Republican leader of the Senate, Rhode Island's Nelson Aldrich Commission, assisted by a team of economists. They traveled to Europe to study the central banks in Britain and Germany and left impressed. Now, let me stop right there in this article. Why should we be Americans going to Europe, who we fought to get away from the monarchies and the tyranny of Europe, go back over there to learn how they do their banking? Because at this time in America, this thought was going through the elite in America that we're not getting enough from the working people. We need to get more from them. We need to control what's going on. And this is what's leading to this. So they're going back to Europe and learning how the bourgeois over there does it. All right, back to this article. Aldrich and executives from certain banks, including J.P. Morgan and Kuhn, Loeb and Company, met on Jekyll Island in Georgia to hammer out a blueprint for a central bank, which became the plan Aldrich proposed in 1910. Broadly criticized because Aldrich was seen as the epitome of the Eastern Republican establishment, referring to the Europe. This plan never gained bipartisan support. Democrat Woodrow Wilson's 1914 election as president killed any hope for this Republican plan, though President Wilson thought the overall concept of a central bank had merit. Now remember, Wilson, it was a progressive and a globalist. So the more control the government had of things, the better off the government is. Wilson back to the article. Wilson sought advice from Virginia Representative Carter Glass, who would become the chair of the House Committee on Banking and Currency, and economist H. Parker Willis, who was in essence a Marxist. He was very close. He enjoyed Marxism. Willis, who devised an alternate plan that called for a network of 12 reserve banks in selected cities. This plan passed and became the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. It incorporated much of Aldrich's original plan, which Wilson believed was 60 to 70% correct. Thereby, in 1913, we get the Federal Reserve, the two amendments to the Constitution, 16 and 17, income tax, and senators are elected by the citizens, not appointed by their legislators. Back to the article. When the initial shots of World War I were fired in the summer of 1914, it caused a crisis and run at U.S. banks. Treasury Secretary William McAdoo quickly solved the bank's liquidity problems by using the powers of the prescient Aldrich-Freeland Act, whereby the country had $500 million in pre-printed emergency banknotes on hand for these banks to use. The banks could deposit government bonds on short-term notes with the Treasury and receive these notes in return, and thus met the runs. Confidence in the power of newly established Federal Reserve was high. In 1915, the first chairman of the Federal Reserve, Charles Hamlin, predicted we will never have any more panics. Boy, was he wrong. In Europe, the war raged on. The United States, though it did not enter combat until 1917, sold war materials and supplies to Britain and France and took gold as payments. Not money, but gold, and subsequently, by the end of the war, it had the largest share of the world's gold supply. You see that trick? It was also owed for large loans that had extended to the two countries. With these events, the dollar replaced the pound as the dominant international currency, and the United States began to replace Britain as the world's financial center. And for the first time in U.S. history, American ownership of foreign assets exceeded foreign ownership of American assets, and it had finally become a creditor nation. A creditor nation. Creation, which many of the founding fathers fought against. They put in Article 1, Section 10, that Congress would have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin. It was Congress's responsibility. But in 1913, they passed it off to a Federal Reserve Bank, which is not a federal agency, folks. It is not. They don't answer to anybody. Yeah, the chairman goes up once a month and gives his report to Congress, and that's about all it is. They don't question him a whole lot. But let's go back to episode 24 of the Medlock Post and bring this back up. George Washington stated, "We should avoid the depreciation of our currency, but I conceive this end would be answered as far as might be necessary by stipulating that all money payments should be made in gold, and silver being the common medium of commerce among nations." What did Woodrow Wilson do after World War I or during World War I? He demanded the other countries pay by gold to take away their power to back their currency by gold and silver. You see that? And now he's got all this gold in America, but what went wrong? by turning over the issuance of money to a private consortium of banks who set up a privately owned bank called the Federal Reserve. This is what Thomas Jefferson said about this. He was indignant, and it can be heard across two vistas of two whole centuries. Thomas Jefferson said, if the American people ever allow the banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children will wake up homeless on the continents their fathers occupied. The issuing power of money should be taken from the banks and restored to Congress and the people to whom it belonged. Picture, folks. Jefferson warned us. Washington warned us. And others of that time warned us against the central banks. They had tried it twice. The first United States Bank at the original time, the second Bank of the United States under Andrew Jackson and Lincoln. And we'll get to that. Do not let these banks, independently owned and operated outside of the government, control this. This is what happened in Europe. The Rothschilds in the 1600s started controlling everything through their bank. And this is what, in the 1900s, our Congress went over and looked at and said, how are you doing it, guys? How are you controlling everything? And this is what they wanted. They wanted to emulate what Europe was doing. And it really hasn't worked out well for America. Now, there were many things that have gone wrong. This brought about what's called fractional banking. You guys have heard me talk about this on many occasions throughout the years. Now, at that time, the bank was allowed to issue 3 or 4 times more paper notes or loans than it had in assets. 3 or 4 times. So it means that it had to have 1/3, 25%, or 33% of its assets sitting in the bank to loan against. This is what Jefferson said about this. Hang on a second. The banks themselves were doing business on capital assets, 3/4 of which were fictitious. And he goes on and he says, at the first signs of a pending bust, this fictitious capital is now to be lost and to fall on somebody. It, the bank, must take on those who have property to meet it, and probably on the less cautious part, who are not aware of the impending catastrophe, have suffered themselves to contract or to be in debt, and must now sacrifice their property of a value many times the amount of the debt. We have been truly sowing the wind and are now reaping the whirlwind. Now that is a quote that I could say today, instead of reading it, I could say that today, and it's as true today as it was 200 years ago. This fractional banking, the central bank, the banking system, can control boom or bust. And the central bank, the Federal Reserve right now, in concert with the democratic socialist policies and ideology, are attempting to crash this economy. More on Jefferson's protest. At a time we were funding our national debt, we heard more about a public debt being a public blessing, that the stock representing it was a creation of active capital for the ailment of commerce, manufactures, and agriculture. This paradox was well adapted to the minds of believers in dreams. So let's take a look at what's going on. You have hundreds of thousands of people that wanted to go to college and went out, and now that number is 1.7 or 1.8 trillion dollars in debt just to go to college, and most of them to come out with nothing but a piece of paper and debt, which the Biden administration is throwing onto property owners, going back to what Jefferson said, that corporations will grow up around them, will deprive the people of property. The people of property are the taxpayers, the hardworking people, the people with money in the bank that pay their taxes every year. And so now they're throwing that, oh, you poor people that went to college and you can't get a job and you can't repay your loan, well, that's fine. The government will take care of you. We're going to move it over here to people who have property and take it from them. Do you see this corollary, folks? It's not hard to see, and it shouldn't be hard to understand. Now, this fractional banking in the United States today is 90%. They can loan on 10% of assets. And the example I use is you go deposit $100 into your savings account. That means the bank can loan $900 against that $100. You see that? So if there's a run on the bank, there's no money there. So what's going to happen? Oh, the government's just going to print more money and cover your rear end. That's what we're looking at. Now, moving forward, you had Thomas Jefferson, then you had Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln try to get the monetary program turned back over to Congress. They wanted Congress so that Congress would issue its own money and banks would be required to loan on existing assets rather than use fictitious money. They wanted to get rid of the boom and bust cycle. They wanted stability. But who benefits from this instability? The government. They can use it to gain more power. They can use it to put more regulations in place. Corporations can use it. Banks can use it to get more money, more power. Who's hurting? The citizens. Because Jackson and Lincoln wanted to do away with it, the London Times, Europe got scared. The London Times wrote an article. It was a frantic article about what was going on. It says in this article, quote, if that mischievous financial policy, the policy of straight banking, no fictional lending, if this mischievous financial policy, which had its origins in the North American Republic during the late war in that country, the Civil War, should become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off its debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous beyond precedent in the history of the civilized governments of the world. The brains and the wealth of all countries will go to North America. That government must be destroyed or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe, unquote. London Times. right after the Civil War. They were scared to death of straight commerce banking. And we went that way for a while. The Second Bank of the United States failed, and we went back to it. Now, Jefferson also pointed to the latter days, and he says, "We are overdone with banking institutions, which have banished the precious metals and substituted a more fluctuating and unsafe medium. These have withdrawn capital from useful improvements and employments to nourish idleness." Let me read that again. These are withdrawn capital from useful improvements and employments to nourish idleness. These are evils more easily to be deployed than remedied. And he further stated, Jefferson, "We are completely saddled and bridled, and the bank is so firmly mounted on us that we must go where it will guide." So do you see, they're basically saying, if the bank has all of private banks and the central bank has all this power, they can lead us around by the nose. Because we get so focused on money and wealth that we get sucked into all of this. Folks, they don't teach this in school. I wasn't taught any of this in school. I didn't learn any of this till I was in college, and I had a good professor at Arizona State who taught this stuff. He was a very successful businessman, and he hated banks. He says they're a necessary evil. Now, I've used banks in my business time, in my adult life, yeah. But since the mid-'80s, when there was a stock market crash in 1985. The market dropped over 500 points in one day. And you go, oh, 500 points. Well, that's when the market was at 2,500, not at 32,000. I could see it coming. I was telling everybody I could, if you have stock, there's some strategies you can use. Either sell it and go to cash, or sell half of it and go to cash and short the other half, which is a bet that everything's going down. And I kept telling people this. And a bunch of them did it. When the market crashed, I mean, stocks were going down $15, $20 a share. And at that time, we didn't have $1,000 prices on stocks per share. So when stocks were going down like crazy, some of them 50, 60, 70%, people were calling me up, praising me. How did you know this was going to happen? It was very simple. The value of the stock market had way increased over the value of the dollar. It was a false economy. And yes, this is under Reagan's time. The stock market's value was way over the value of the dollar. And all of a sudden, people realized it. Folks, it was like it was literally a run on the bank. People lost tons of money because they were greedy. And that's led to, let's go back to the stock market crash of 1929. At that time, you could buy stocks on 10% margin. 10% more. You put down a dime and buy $1 stock. Well, when Hoover called all the loans in, the banks panicked. People were panicking. The assets were not there for the run on the banks. So there's a mass sell-off in the stock market. Couldn't even meet those demands. That's why people were jumping out of windows. Now, today you buy stock on 50% margin if you go that route. So the Federal Reserve, we're sitting here watching this. They're looking at raising rates again next month, well, next week, by 75 basis points, or even 100 basis points. We talked about this on yesterday's show. But there's some things that have come out since then, since yesterday, and they're very important things for you to know. Inflation versus deflation. Now, Jefferson mentioned that in one of his quotes. First by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property. Does inflation take away the value of your property? Yeah, your wages, you might be getting a raise, but your spendable income's going down. The value of the dollar is going down. And now deflation, there's some articles that have come out this morning from comments yesterday. Kathy Woods is a bond trader. And contrarian deflation call gets endorsements from Elon Musk and Jeffrey Gutlock. Now, realistically, I could care less what Elon Musk says anymore. I've just had it with that guy. I don't think he's that smart, to tell you the truth. I think he has good people around him. This thing with Twitter is going to cost him a ton of money. But she has come out. She is the most vocal proponent for deflation. So it is getting a few high-profile supporters. And lists people recently joined Wood's camp in calling for a decline for prices, expressing worries that the Federal Reserve might go too far in raising the rates. The so-called bond king worried of deflation risk on Tuesday, urging investors to buy long-term treasuries, because that's where she makes a lot of money, buying treasuries. Tesla CEO Elon Musk called falling commodity prices neither subtle nor secret, and tweeted to his 100 million followers that a major Fed rate hike risk deflation. We are getting some loud voices now accompanying us on this deflation risk. Now, folks, there is some deflation going on out there, because items that are not selling in stores, the prices are being lowered. When the manufacturers are not selling those items anymore, or it goes way down, they will lower the price so they can move them. That's deflation. And a lot of times they lose money by doing that. So here again, you've got this seesaw, inflation, deflation, deflation, inflation. And it's crazy to watch that take place. Gold is a good place to go right now, gold and silver. Although it was down the last couple of days. I don't know why. But you see, now there are calls out there saying, Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve, you need to slow down here, folks. You're moving too fast. You've raised the rates the last 3 months. Give them a chance to work. If you're raising the rates every month, you're just adding to the problem. Oh, really? They've already announced they're going to raise rates September, October, and or October, November, and December. They've already announced it. They're not going to slow down. They are not going to play the supply side economics here, which is the way we should be going. Let the market take care of itself. But they don't want to do that. They want to control this. They want to make things go to a bust cycle so they can control more things, so they can wipe out more personal debt and more personal property and put it into the hands of the globalists or the elites or to the banks. I mentioned yesterday with my banker friend, he's a commercial loaner, he says, these rates keep going up. He says more and more projects are going to be put on hold. And rates are still going up today. The 2-year rate is still going up. 10-year rate is still going up on bonds. Now that there's this big yell, like Kathy Wood, go buy bonds. You know, get 3.85% for the next 2 years versus risking the market. So that's where we are in all of this, folks. This is why we're here, to educate, to help you understand that you're being manipulated. We're living since the 80s, and I'm not the only one that believes this. We are operating under a false economy. I mentioned student loan debt, $1.8 trillion. Personal credit card debt in this country is like $12-15 trillion. Corporate debt is in the trillions of dollars. Now, we don't throw in home mortgage debt because there's something to back that up. You have an asset to back that up. But home sales are down 29%. Rates keep going up. More and more people are being kicked out of the opportunity to buy a home. And that's what they want, folks. They want everybody living in communities like apartments or townhouses and condos, so we're better manageable. It's part of this big overall. And you're sitting there, Medlock, you're a conspiracy theorist. And that's fine. You can call me that. I'm talking about from reality. I'm talking about what the globalists are saying, what the United Nations is trying to do. Go look up their Agenda 21. And that's part of what Biden is doing to farmers in this country. That's why billionaires like Gates are out there buying a farmland. They're not going to farm it. They're not going to develop it. Did you know that China is one of the largest buyers of farmland in this country? But do you know where they're buying that land? Near United States military bases. Yes. Why are they doing that? To spy on military bases? Maybe. And what's the Biden administration doing about it? Probably helping them. They're probably telling them where the land is to go buy. And farmland's, it's not like you go out to buy a lot for land or commercial development. Farmland, compared to that, is relatively cheap. All right, I was going to play that soundbite, wasn't I? Tomorrow, like I said, we're going to have Joni Bryan on, and we're going to celebrate Constitution Day. She's with the 917 Society, and this organization is putting constitutions in the hand of 8th graders and 11th graders, and it is going over super. People are changing their minds about America after they read these little Constitution pamphlets. It's amazing. And I think we're going to have a teacher or two call in and talk about it. We have almost eaten up the first hour, haven't we? But it was worth it, folks, to understand what's being done to you and me, ordinary citizens. And that's why I brought up, I didn't bring it up when we had our conversation Monday on Convention of States, or did I? Yeah, I did. Doing away with the Federal Reserve. Doing away with fractional banking. Then we would see real growth in this country. Now, if things get tough, and Biden administration wants to call in loans, the Federal Reserve wants to call in loans, they might do that. I've got something that was sent to me the other day. Let me play my soundbite. Folks, this is from my previous radio program on Blog Talk Radio, which was called World Reality. And I went back looking and I saw the date, September 17th, 2015. And I says, I bet you I did something about the Constitution. And by darn, I did. So let's take, it's about 10 minutes. And it might not be the best soundbite. And I want to caution you here. I had just had eye surgery on both eyes. And you'll see that in some of my reading where I got words wrong and went back and apologize for that. And some of my slow reading because I was getting over eye surgery. And the eye surgery worked. It was great. And we might talk about that later. But let's listen to this. This is me on World Reality, September 19th, 2015.
The Constitution. I just want to go into the Constitution. We always need to spend time on the Constitution. And I want to read some things. Most of what I'm going to read are quotes or things written by some of the Founding Fathers. Now, there's a whole bunch of them concerning the Constitutional Convention. But I'm going to focus just on a few. There's not enough time to read all of them and put it into perspective. But I want to start by reading from The Miracle at Philadelphia. And if you've never read this book by Andrew Allison, you need to read it. It was written for the second centennial anniversary of the Constitution. And it's a fabulous book going back and putting together the tenets of the Founding Fathers and how they developed this. Now, I've done this on shows before, a little different than Andrew Allison did, and I brought in other things that went further back and outside of what he did. But this is what he says from The Miracle at Philadelphia. Like the framers themselves, many Americans in the early years of the Republic truly regarded the Constitution as a miracle. Not only did they praise the competence, wisdom, and motivations of those who served in the Federal Convention of 1787, but they declared that the formation and adoption of our new system of federal government represented a political achievement unprecedented in human history. They looked upon it, moreover, as an event that was actually influenced, guided, and governed by the hand of God. Thus, it is not hard to understand why our Founding Fathers believed that the Constitution was destined to bless all mankind, and that it was incumbent on their successors, you and I, to preserve and defend our national charter of liberty. These convictions, articulated in the statements quoted below, should move today's Americans to serious reflection and appropriate action during the bicentennial and beyond. James Madison. The great objects which presented themselves to the Constitutional Convention formed a task more difficult than can be well conceived by those who were not concerned in the execution of it. Adding to these considerations the natural diversity of human opinions on all new and complicated subjects, it is impossible to consider the degree of concord which ultimately prevailed as less than a miracle. And that degree of concord, ladies and gentlemen, is a unanimous decision that was put together. James Wilson. Governments in general have been the result of force, of fraud, and accident. After a period of 6,000 years has elapsed since the creation, the United States exhibits to the world the first instance, as far as we can learn, of a nation unattacked by external force, unconvulsed by domestic insurrections, assembling voluntarily, deliberating fully, and deciding calmly concerning that system of government under which they would wish that they and their posterity should live. Historical facts here, folks. James Wilson again. I can well recollect, though I believe I cannot convey to others, the impression which, on many occasions, was made by the difficulties which surrounded and pressed the Federal Convention. The great undertaking sometimes seemed to be at a stand. At other times, its motion seemed to be retrograde. At the conclusion, however, of our work, many of the members expressed their astonishment at the success which it terminated. James Madison again. It is not the glory of the people of America that, while they have paid a decent regard to the opinions of former times and other nations, that they have not suffered a blind veneration of antiquity for custom or for names to overrule the suggestions of their own good sense, the knowledge of their own situation, and the lessons of their own experience. To this manly spirit, posterity will be indebted for the possession and the world for the example of the numerous innovations displayed on the American theater in favor of private rights and public happiness. Happily for America, happily we trust for the whole human race, the founders of the nation pursued a new and more noble course. They accomplished a revolution which has no parallel in the annals of human society. They reared the fabrics of governments which have no model on the face of the globe. They formed the design of a great confederacy which it is incumbent on their successors to improve and perpetuate. Again, you and I. Benjamin Rush. Dr. Rush then proceeded to consider the origin of the proposed Constitution and fairly deduced it was from heaven, asserting that he as much believed the hand of God was employed in this work as that God had divided the Red Sea to give a passage to the children of Israel, or had formulated the Ten Commandments from Mount Sinai. John Adams. The Constitution is the greatest single effort of national deliberation that the world has ever seen. Benjamin Franklin. I have so much faith in the general government of the world by providence that I can hardly conceive a transaction of such momentous importance as the framing of the Constitution should be suffered to pass without being in some degree influenced, guided, and governed by that omnipotent, omnipresent, and beneficent ruler in whom all inferior spirits live and move and have their being. Charles Pinckney, and of course I have to read this one because he was the representative from South Carolina. When the General Convention met, no citizen of the United States could expect less from it than I did. So more jarring interests and prejudices to reconcile. The variety of pressing dangers at our doors, even during the war, were barely sufficient to force us to act in concert and necessarily give way at times to each other. But when the good work was done and published, I was not only most agreeably disappointed, but struck with amazement. Nothing less than that superintending hand of Providence that so miraculously carried us through the war could have brought it about. So we are looking here at the Founding Fathers, in their own words, are telling us of the miracle that was wrought in Philadelphia. And, you know, the people of the country believed at the time. De Tocqueville in 1830 wrote the same thing, that America was a very religious society. That was their main purpose in life, was to maintain their religion. And, of course, their freedoms and their property and so forth. Now, a couple more here by Thomas Jefferson. And these are kind of predictions. And he was very good at pointing out, if you stray from the Constitution, this is what's going to happen. Because history of the world had proved everything that he predicted true in other countries, that happened in other countries. We owe every endurable sacrifice to ourselves, to our federal brethren, and to the world at large, to pursue with temper and perseverance the great experiment which shall prove that man is capable of living in society, governing itself by laws self-imposed, and securing to its member the enjoyment of life, liberty, property, and peace. And then he goes forth and he says, and this is in 1825 when he wrote this, and even when the government of the nation's choice shall manifest a tendency to degeneracy, we are not at once to despair, because the will and the watchfulness of its sound parts will reform its aberrations, recall it to original and legitimate principles, and restrain it within the rightful limits of self-government. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is from his draft declaration and protest of Virginia, December 1825. He is telling us, as he did in the Declaration of Independence, that we as citizens have the right to put the Constitution back in order.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, find my microphone here. That was me 17 years ago on World Reality Radio, and that was on Blog Talk Radio. There's some important points in there, and I think that last part with Jefferson is so prevalent today to go into the discussion of Convention of States. Bring the power back to the people. It's important. And I'll play that, or I will. I've already copied it onto Otter, the transcript, so I might refer to that as we go forth in the future on some things, and maybe throw a couple of those quotes in tomorrow. I don't want to play it tomorrow because Jody and I have so many things to talk about tomorrow. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at the time, and I'm looking at things to talk about. I'm looking at a chart of inflation since January of 2020. And, of course, we know what happened in 2020, right? The pandemic did the shutdown. It's interesting. This chart shows, it says, the area in gray is a recession. Well, it's this big, tall strip in the second quarter of 2020 showing a recession. And inflation had dropped down to just almost nothing during that period, from just over 2% to almost nothing. Well, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we were in a lockdown. The government locked down everything. There was nothing happening. And they were very, very quick then to call this a recession. Why? Trump was in office, and everything was rocking and rolling until the pandemic hit. So here we had a 3-month recession, and the Democrats just jumped all over it. Now we've had a recession for 6 months, and no problem. No, we're not in a recession. Everything's fine. No inflation. It's zero inflation. We're good. So market's up 524. I just looked over there. 231. Or what is that? I'm looking at the wrong thing. But maybe it was the market. I looked real quick. Market's up today. Oh, I'm not going to worry about that. In January of 2021, when he whose name we shall not mention took office, inflation was 1.7%. 1.7%, folks, in January of 2021. Today it is at 8.3%. I'm going to get my little calculator out here, and I'm going to 8.3 divided by 1.7 equals 4.88 times that inflation has gone up. It's gone up 4.88 times since January of 21 at 8.3%. So almost 5 times what it was. Now, how in heaven's name can you stand there and look America in the eye and say there is zero inflation? And it's not stopping, folks. Nobody is agreeing that inflation's going to stop because all these policies in place and all this spending that's in place. I just wanted to point that out again. I know I'm not beating a dead horse. This is not a dead horse. Inflation is not a dead horse. The economy shrinking is not a dead horse. We have a bunch of dead horses in Washington, and I'm sure some of you are calling them something other than a horse. Okay. But here was the AP this morning. I love this. I'm not going to get to that. It's kind of a conspiracy thing. It's kind of an extreme thing. We'll get to it. There might be some truth to it, but not today. I'm not going to get to it today. From the AP this morning, U.S. inflation is showing signs of entering a more stubborn phase that will likely require drastic action by the Federal Reserve. So on one side, we got people saying, hey, Federal Reserve, just keep pushing, keep raising those rates. And the other side saying, whoa, you're moving too fast, slow down, which that's the camp I'm on. And it says some of the longtime drivers, it says drastic action by the Federal Reserve, a shift that has panicked financial market and heightens the risk of a recession. Folks, we are in a recession. It's just going to get worse. Some of the longtime drivers of higher inflation, spiking gas prices, supply chain snares, soaring used car prices are fading. No, they're not. Gas prices are going up because new taxes are kicking in. Supply chain snarls are still there. used car prices have gone up 13% this year. So what is fading about that? Yet, underlying measures of inflation are actually worsening. Yes, thank you. He goes on, and you know who's to blame for all of this? The consumer. You're spending too much money. What? I'm trying to survive. I'm trying to eat, trying to pay my utility bills, trying to keep my house over my head. I got to put gas in my vehicle to go to work. Oh, but if you had an electric vehicle, you wouldn't have to do that. Folks, it costs more to charge an electric vehicle than gas prices today. And that's when they were at $4.50 a gallon for gas. Tell you that, do they? You know, it's crazy. All right. Yesterday, and I got to throw this in. This is give you something to think about. There's an article, Yahoo News. World must be ready for Russia's disintegration, U.S. general says. His name is Hodges. It is becoming increasingly clear that Ukraine is going to win this war and that the Kremlin faces a historical crisis of confidence. Duh. Indeed, I now believe it is a genuine possibility that Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's exposed weaknesses are so severe that we might be witnessing the beginning of the end, not only of his regime, but of the Russian Federation itself. Now, we might see Vladimir Putin go away, but we're not going to see Russia go away, folks. The Russian Federation is not going anywhere because it has support of China, India, Pakistan, and Turkey, and others. It's not going anywhere. Now, are they going to lose this war? I don't know. They're in retreat right now in some areas. But in essence, they won the war. Now, Richard, what are you talking about? This was not about a Russia-Ukraine situation. 2-3 weeks prior to Russia invading, I kept asking the question, is this about just Russia and Ukraine, or is this about a globalist play? And the answer is B. It's about a globalist play. So in essence, Russia won this war. Russia has the globalists on their side. Russia has turned off gasoline and fuel to Europe. The globalists want that. They want Europe suffering. They want Europe coming to them. Please help us. Please, World Economic Forum, UN, please help us. What are we going to do? Russia's not going anywhere, folks. Putin might. Or is he? He's part of this. He's part of this globalist plan. And you say, Richard, you're a dang conspiracy theorist. That's fine. Think what you will. Go do your homework. And you won't think this way. You'll understand what's being reported and be able to pick it apart and say, wait a minute. What are you saying here? This is a false, to me, it's a false report. This shouldn't even been said. Yesterday I talked about climate change a little bit. Matter of fact, more than a little bit. I'm going to give you some more today. It's interesting. Now, I have a climate change prediction, and it's going to come true. Next Thursday, September 22nd, 2022, at 9:04 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, there will be a major climate change event around the world. It's called the autumnal equinox. It's when the sun crosses what we call the celestial equator, an imaginary extension of Earth's equator line, into space. which a lot of our politicians have their heads in space. So fall starts. That's my prediction. And I guess I shouldn't say around the world, in the northern hemisphere, because fall doesn't start in the southern hemisphere till March of next year. So what starts down there? Springtime, folks. They're just the opposite. All right, here's another fact you need to know. Because of, I talked about yesterday, they're saying by 2050 that a bunch of land in the United States along the Gulf Coast and Atlantic Coast is going to be underwater. A bunch of 650,000 properties lost, et cetera, et cetera. Water is the only known non-metallic substance that expands when it freezes. Its density decreases and it expands approximately 9% by volume. Do you get that? All right, now why do I say that? The owner of Patagonia, the outdoor clothing and all that stuff, he and his family, they're getting out of the company, they're turning it over, and they're going to take their $3 billion and give it over to, that's correct, organizations to fight climate change. Now, I'm still figuring out how you fight climate change. Then the UN warns the world is entering uncharted territories of destruction from climate crisis. The United Nations is warning that the impacts of global climate change are entering uncharted territories of destruction as countries fail to set adequate targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The report compiled by the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, said climate-related disasters have increased fivefold over the past 5 decades and are costing $200 million a day. Really? Like we've never had hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, earthquakes. See, they don't want you to look back further than 5 years. They don't want you to look back further than the day you were born. Another scare tactics. Okay. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres cited this year's floods in Pakistan, heat waves in Europe, and record drought conditions in parts of the U.S. and China as failures to combat climate change and curb fossil fuel production. Folks, this is not the first time those events have taken place in those areas. There's nothing unnatural about the new scale of these disasters. Really. Look back. You know, every year is worse than the year before, which is a bunch of baloney. I'm going to skip forward here. Because here again, the UN is trying to control everything along with the globalists, the World Economic Forum, and others. Now, agreement as concentrations of greenhouse gases continue to reach new highs. Last year, nearly 200 nations came together at the UN Global Climate Summit in Scotland. Excuse me. And this is what they want to do. That the global climate pledges for 2030 must be 4 times higher to limit global warming. To limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. Well, folks, 2 degrees, okay, it's not going to go up more than 2 degrees, which really doesn't do anything. But what is 2 degrees Celsius in Fahrenheit? It's 35.6 degrees. So see how they're playing this game? We want to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, or let's put it in other terms, we're going to limit global warming to 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's on track to limit it to 1.5 Celsius or 34.7 degrees. So are they really saying that the temperature is going to go up 35 degrees Fahrenheit? Are they really? Hey, go do your science on the conversion, folks, from Celsius to Fahrenheit. Scientists said there's 48% chance that the global temperature rise compared to pre-industrial times will reach 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 5 years. And there's a 93% chance that 1 year in the next 5 will experience record heat. Oh, really? I could have predicted that. Oh, in the next 5 years, we might have a heat wave. Really? All right, folks. This reminds me of a quote from William Shakespeare. What a terrible era in which idiots govern the blind. That should be what a terrible era era in which idiots govern the blind. That's what we're at. That's where we're at, folks. That's where we're at. We have idiots governing the blind. Folks, that's it for today for the Medlock Post Show. I can't take any more. Tomorrow, the Constitution Day celebration. Jody Byron will be with us from the 917 Society. So, folks, have a great day, and let's just go out, have a good time, do like Thomas Paine says, use some common sense. When you start doing that, things fall into place. Your understanding goes way up. So let's listen to the song that we use coming in, our introductory song, Days of Glory, and let's listen to this on the way out.